Hey, my name's Tasha Pettman. My husband and I are the community pastors here at Liberty Church London, and we're so grateful that you've joined us today. And I get the honour and privilege of bringing today's message. Well, this week on Monday night, we had a couple round from church, and we had them round for dinner, and they're American, so we cooked them the most British meal we could ever cook. We made them pie, potatoes, gravy, with an apple crumble to finish. I mean, you can't get more British than that, right? And they brought a board game because we love board games in our household. So they brought a new one that we'd not played before, and they taught us this really complicated board game, and it's called 7 Wonders. And because they are both very competitive, I just have to let you know that I won. Yeah, first timer, won the game. So proud of myself. But whilst we were eating and chatting, we got onto the conversation of the COVID vaccine because I just had my second dose that morning. And so we were chatting about the side effects that we'd experienced. See, for me, I'd not experienced any side effects on my first one other than a painful arm. Johnny obviously had experienced a bit of man flu during his vaccine. And as we were sharing, the girl said that she had experienced the COVID vaccine rash as a side effect. And I was like, whoa, I've not even heard of that. What's that? You see, either none of my friends or family have ever experienced that, or none of them have spoken about it. But she was sharing that she had this rash that had lasted a few days after the vaccine. The following day, 24 hours after my vaccine, I was like, "Way, I'm side effect free. I've got no side effects. This is amazing." And then that evening, I started to get a bit itchy. And as I went to bed, I noticed I had a rash down my left arm. I took a bit of antihistamine and went to bed. But by the time I woke up the following morning, I had this like hivey allergic rash all across my body. And I was like, whoa. What I didn't look up Google, didn't phone my doctor. I just texted my friend. I was like, hey, you mentioned the other night that you had this rash. I've now strangely got this rash. What did you do to stop the itching? You see, I'm an absolute wuss when it comes to itching rashes. I just can't cope. I have no self-control whatsoever. I just want to scratch. But I texted my friend. I was like, hey, I need your top tips. And she was able to text back and say, hey, look, these are the things that helped me, and I'm going to be praying for you. You see, it was great to know that I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one that had experienced this COVID vaccine rash. I had known it was a possibility before it even came, and I had someone to turn to for support, tips, advice, and prayer. Today we're talking about mental health. And I want you to understand that if you are struggling today, you are not going through it alone. And there is so much power in sharing, both for you and for others. My one mission today, above everything else, is to encourage anyone who is struggling alone with their mental health, whether that's anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, or anything else. My one mission is to encourage you into community, that you would find the courage to speak up and to let someone know, I'm not okay. Sadly, there is still a stigma around mental health. Many people who have mental health issues feel shame, feel weak, or maybe even feel like they've failed. Let me tell you, that is not the case. And the church should be the safest place in the world for you to go through your struggles and your challenges. And that is our prayer for Liberty. But we know that sometimes the church hasn't been that for people. We know that church has sometimes given vague or shallow answers where they've said, hey, just pray more, worship harder. If you go to church more, you won't be depressed. Well, if you've heard that, let me say I'm truly sorry. That is not true. Yes, mental health can be spiritual, but you may also need physical. You may need to see a doctor. You may need medication. You may need counselling, and there is no shame in doing so. And let me be clear, please hear this. As the pastor of this church, maybe even as your pastor, if you are struggling today, hear this. It is not because you're not spiritual enough. It is not because you're not spiritual enough. That is a complete lie. And struggling with mental health is also not your identity. Did you know it's okay not to be okay? It's just not okay to stay that way. We have to move through it. So today we're going to be reading the Bible. We're going to be reading 1 Kings chapter 19. But before we do, I'd love to give you a little quick highlight of what's been happening previously up until this point. For example, this is like the moment at the beginning of your next One Tree Hill episode where it says, previously on One Tree Hill. Well, this is your previously in Kings. Well, we meet a man called Elijah, and he is a fierce man of God. He sees a boy raised from the dead. He outruns a horse. He should be at the Olympics. And he is fed by ravens. And by that, I literally mean he's out hanging out in the wilderness, and he says, hey, God, I'm a bit peckish, could do with a snack. And along comes Nando's, dropped by ravens. Who needs Deliveroo when you've got ravens, right? And then in chapter 18, the previous chapter to what we're about to read, we see him have this epic showdown on Mount Carmel with 450 prophets of Baal. What happens is they create 2 altars, and they take 2 bulls and put them on the altars. And they basically have this like showdown to see whose God is the best. Is it Elijah's God, the God, the one that we worship? Is he the one that's going to pour down fire and burn up the bull? Or is it Baal, the person that the prophets were worshipping? So Elijah, being the gentleman that he was, he says, hey, you go first. And they spend like all day singing, dancing, cutting themselves in the hope that Baal will come and burn up this offering. Elijah stands back, watches from the sideline, shouts out a few heckles, mocks them a little bit, and then eventually says, hey guys, it's my turn. My turn. You've had long enough. And you know what? He's so confident in God, so confident that God will show up. He ups the stakes. He builds a ditch around the altar and floods the altar and the ditch with water, so it's absolutely drenched through. And then what he does is he just says a simple prayer. No dancing, no singing, no cutting. Just says a simple prayer, and God turns up. Fire from heaven falls down, and the entire thing is consumed. He wins the victory. God wins the victory in this moment. And so as a result, in typical Old Testament fashion, Elijah has all of the prophets put to death. What a triumph. Elijah wins. He's living his best life in this moment. He's on the mountaintop, like literally and metaphorically, living on the mountaintop. But as we all know, sometimes, once you've hit the mountaintop, what's on the other side is the valley. And our greatest achievements are so often followed by our greatest discouragements. So now we encounter Elijah in chapter 19 in the aftermath of this amazing success. This is 1 Kings 19 verse 1, and it says this. When Ahab, who's the current king of Israel, gets home and tells Jezebel, who's his wife, and a kind of crazy lady, everything that Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel then sends this message to Elijah saying, may the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you have killed them. Elijah was afraid, fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. Let's pause there for a moment. I just want to highlight a few things. Elijah has experienced this mega high. He's experienced this mountaintop experience where God came, showed up. And yet a few moments later, somebody threatens him and he lets fear set in. It can cause so many things in us. It can make our bodies panic, and it can cause anxiety, depression to set in. Anxiety and depression are like 2 sides of the same coin. Anxiety stretches us really thin and makes you feel like you're completely out of control. Depression feels like it's constricting you and that the darkness is overtaking. Typically, one will follow the other. There's this quote that says, having anxiety and depression is like being scared and tired at the same time. It's the fear of failure but having no urge to be productive. It's wanting friends but not wanting to socialise. It's wanting to be alone but not wanting to be lonely. It's feeling everything and then feeling paralysingly numb. Fear causes anxiety, and when anxiety sets in, your thinking gets faulty. I've suffered with anxiety for many years now. I was first officially diagnosed with it back in May 2019, but I still remember times as a child when I couldn't sleep because I just felt so worried and anxious and panicked. And my mum would say, "Oh, why can't you sleep?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm so worried." And she'd be like, "What are you worried about?" And I'd be like, "I don't know." And I remember those moments so vividly. But a few weeks back on a Monday morning, I'd not had enough sleep, and I know that that is one of my triggers. And I opened up my work emails and I found 50 system errors to do with the system that was my responsibility. And the errors were all connected to donations. And as somebody who works for a charity, donations are so important. But because I was tired, I didn't have the time to get control of my thinking, and my thinking got faulty really quickly, and my anxiety began to spiral out of control. I soon had no space in my brain to even consider fixing the problem that was going on in the system, and I'd already told myself that it was my fault, that it was an absolute disaster, it was going to be a disaster for the organisation, and that there was no way I was going to be able to fix it because I am not that clever. And I spiraled even further into thinking the new job that I just agreed to move to in a few months' time was the wrong job for me, and I couldn't even do the new job, and why did they even offer it to me? And they're going to figure out I'm a fraud on day one, and this is all a disaster. My thinking got faulty. One thing I've learned over the years is that emotions and feelings are temporary. Sometimes they don't feel like it, but they are. Sometimes they might be there for a week or a day or even just a moment, but they always change. And in moments when our anxiety, our depression begins to take over, we need to stop listening to ourselves and start talking to ourselves, speaking truth over ourselves instead of listening to the lies that are out of control. There's a tale that psychologists often use called the tale of two wolves. And it's basically this grandfather is talking to his grandchild and tells the boy about this forest that has two wolves in it, a good wolf and a bad wolf. And the little boy says, "Does the good wolf win?" And the grandfather says, "No," which is really surprising, right? Every fairy tale, the good person wins, but the grandfather says no. Whichever wolf you feed the most is the one that wins. And this is a great story for thinking about our mind. What's going on in your mind? You know, we have good thoughts in our mind and we have negative thoughts in our mind. Are we feeding the good thoughts or are we feeding the negative thoughts? Because whichever one we're feeding is the one that's going to win. So in moments when we feel that our anxiety is beginning to spiral, we need to take control and start speaking to ourselves. You know, I should have sat there and said, "Hey Tash, stop it. You can do this. You're qualified. They chose you for a reason. Take a moment, take a breath. You can tackle it one step at a time." If we start speaking over ourselves, the truth, we can gain control. But Elijah, he let his fear creep in and cause him to flee from where he thought he might get caught. And it caused him to be anxious, and his anxiety caused him to have faulty thinking. You see, we see this because it says that he then went to Bathsheba in Judah and he left his servant there and he went on into the wilderness alone. You see, depression causes us to detach. If you've ever felt depressed, you will have experienced that feeling where you want to be around nobody, where you want to just curl up and do nothing. And this is what Elijah felt. But isolation is not where you want to be fighting that battle. God's remedy for so many things in our lives is people. People are the solution. Community is the solution. And that's why here at Liberty Church London, we go on and on and on about community, because we believe that community is not just a luxury that you sometimes get to have in your life, but community is a necessity for us to survive. Do you know we've never needed community more than we do now? Not only are our lives filled with connections that are virtual, online, and our work life is so busy that we hardly have time to see actual people, but we've just gone through a year of isolation where you hardly get to see anybody. We need community. The people around you are your resources. We have all been through things and we can all share and learn from one another. Had my friend not shared about her rash experience, I would have been completely freaked out come Wednesday morning when I had a rash all over my body. I would have absolutely been at the doctor's or on 111 and completely panicked because I didn't know. Thankfully, she had shared her experience and I was prepared. And I could also reach out to her for her resources, her knowledge, her experience. Also, sometimes you need to be going through things with people, because they experience things differently to the way you do. Johnny and I work really well in this sense, because when we go through something, maybe we've been in a meeting together or we've had an experience together and we come out of it and one of us will be maybe panicked about it and the other one will be like, whoa, what are you panic about? That's not what they said, or that's not how they said it, or that's not what they meant. And you're able to like calm each other down. Elijah's servant would have been with him on Mount Carmel. What if Elijah had taken a moment to say, hey, look, I'm really panicked. This woman is after me. I think I'm going to die. I'm feeling really scared and anxious and stressed. Maybe the servant could have said, hey, dude, like, have you already forgotten the awesomeness of your God? Have you already forgotten what he did just then? And if he did that, I'm 100% sure he's going to keep you safe. But he didn't. Instead, he went into the wilderness alone. And when he was there, he was absolutely ready to give up. He's like, God, take my life. I no longer want to be here. This is all too much. And Elijah is now basically on suicide watch. He's so afraid that someone might kill him that he wants to take matters into his own hands and kill himself. Please hear this. If you are in that place where sadness is so great that you want to end it all, please, please, please speak to somebody. Whether that's a friend, a family member, a doctor, or even phoning the Samaritans. And you can find the details on the screen now. You can call them on 116 123, or you can text SHOUT to 85258. There are incredible professionals at the end of the phone who want to help you and coach you through this season. Let me tell you, you do not have to die to end the pain. There are other ways to kill your sadness. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. I know it may not feel like temporary right now, but hear me when I say it is. There is more to live for. You may be going through the very worst season of your life, but it is always too soon to quit. And we love you. So what do we do when we feel anxious, when we feel depressed, when we feel suicidal? And I absolutely love what this story goes on to talk about. And so let's carry on reading from verse 5, and it says this. Then Elijah lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there beside his head, was some bread on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and then lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, "Get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead will be too much for you." So he got up, ate, drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. There he came to a cave where he spent the night. I love this. I love how it highlights how important sleep and rest are. 3 years ago in 2019, when I was hit rock bottom with my anxiety and was officially diagnosed and signed off work, I just couldn't sleep. Every morning I would get up out of bed feeling so anxious because I'd not slept. I would spend the day feeling anxious, and then as I went to bed, I would feel so anxious that I wouldn't sleep, and it was such a cycle, like a never-ending cycle of anxiety. I spoke to the doctor, and the doctor suggested some sleeping tablets, which I started to take. And interestingly enough, when I got control of my sleep, I found it so much easier to get control of my anxiety. Rest and sleep is a necessity in our lives. It is so important. When was the last time that you had a good night's sleep? But not just sleep. An angel then rocks up with some fresh bread and water. Like, sweet, right? Your own personal angel waiter coming to feed you. Like, I love the combination here of natural and supernatural. You see, there was food, there was bread, there was water, there was sleep. That's really natural. And yet this angel rocks up, which is supernatural. When it comes to us breaking free from our mental illness, we also need a combination method. We need the natural, we need rest, we need sleep, we need food, we need water, we may need medication, therapy, time off work, but we also need supernatural. We need God to break into our world. You know, we can do things to help ourselves when we are feeling depressed or anxious. And one of those things is rhythms. God is all about rhythm. He's a rhythmic God. And by that, I don't mean he can pull out some epic moves, although I'm sure he is pretty phenomenal at the cha-cha slide. But by that, I mean that everything about him is rhythmic. Think about creation. He created for 6 days, he rested for 1. He tells us to work for 6 days, rest for 1. Work, Sabbath, rhythm. He created day and night. Day, night, rhythm. He created the seasons, spring, summer, autumn, winter, rhythm. Therefore, I do believe that rhythm is important in our lives and that we can add rhythms into our lives to help us in our mental health. Rest is important. Play is really important. Being in nature is important. We live in a fast-paced, chaotic world that is go, go, go with no time to rest, sleep, or eat. What habits do you need to add into your life to experience more peace in your mental health? Maybe it's going for walks. Now, for many of us, myself included, I used to love my morning walk to the train station to commute to work. But now that I work from home, I don't have that. How are you putting walks into your time? Maybe it's reflecting. You know, when we don't reflect, the small bad things become massive. When we choose to spend 2 minutes, 10 minutes reflecting on our day, we can manage what actually has happened in our day more objectively. Maybe you need to spend a few moments being grateful and having an attitude of gratitude. Maybe you need to meditate on God's promises, or maybe even you need to unplug from the world. But doing nothing is not an option for us. You see, the angel says, get up. There is action. We have to get up. When I was initially signed off work with my anxiety, I spent the first few days in bed. And I must say there are moments in our lives when spending a day in bed is exactly what we need. But day after day after day is not healthy. And after spending a few days in bed, literally doing nothing, half watching TV and not being able to sleep at night, the anxiety just overwhelmed me. Johnny, my husband, was amazing in that moment, and he noticed that I wasn't spiraling upwards, I was continuing to spiral downwards. And so every morning he would take our daughter Nevaeh to school, and he would come back and he would make me get up out of bed, and we would go for a short 20-minute walk along the canal. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it was a massive, huge step towards recovery for me. Getting up looks different for different people. Maybe for you, getting up looks like actually speaking about the challenges you're facing. Maybe getting up for you is about putting a rhythm of rest into your life and sleep. Maybe all that annual leave that you have at work, you should actually take. We get it for a reason, and we are so blessed in this country to have so much annual leave. We should take some time as design, not as like just of, oh, I should probably take a day off. Let's plan in time to have annual leave. Maybe for you it's eating better, or even just eating regularly. Maybe it's choosing to fight back by going to see a doctor, by taking some medication or getting some therapy or counselling. Maybe for you it's about getting stuck back into community, choosing and forcing yourself out of isolation. I don't know what it is for you, But we each have to choose something. We have to get up. We have to physically do something as well. That's the natural, as well as letting God in with the supernatural. My favourite part of the story is the next part. And it goes on to say this. While Elijah's in the cave, the Lord speaks to Elijah and says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah replies like this, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars and killed every one of your prophets. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." Sounds like my 6-year-old kid, if I'm honest. Like blaming it on everyone else and woe me, everything's wrong. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. I definitely have those moments where you feel like I'm the only one experiencing this. God says to Elijah, "Go and stand out before me on the mountain." And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake there was fire, and the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. It was God. God spoke to him in a whisper. One of the amazing things about whispers is that you can only hear them when you are close. And I love this moment. I love how God uses this whisper to show Elijah, I am still close to you. In spite of your depression, in spite of your anxiety, in spite of your suicidal moments, I am still close. I have never left you. And you know, God is saying that to you today. In spite of whatever it is you're experiencing right now, God is close enough to whisper to you. You know, and the fact that Elijah chose to get up in that moment means that he can still continue with the purpose that God has for him. And God makes it clear to Elijah and to all of us that even though we may have faced oppression, it has not stopped our mission. God still has a purpose for you no matter what you've experienced. So whatever it is you are facing today, firstly know that you are loved and seen by the God who created you, who has a purpose for your life, who has more for you. Secondly, please know that community is where healing can happen. In the New Testament, we actually see 2 disciples, Judas and Peter, both of whom betray Jesus. They both fail in that moment. Judas betrayed Jesus because he was paid. He was basically given money to betray Jesus. And Peter betrayed Jesus because he was. The action was the same. They both did the same thing, but the outcome was different. You see, Judas betrayed Jesus, handed him over for some money. He then felt remorse. He isolated himself and then killed himself. He chose a permanent solution to a temporary problem. But Peter, he betrayed Jesus by saying he didn't even know him, by turning his back on his friend in his moment of need. And yet in that moment, he chose to get back into community. He chose to heal in community. You see, Peter didn't let his failure be the end of him. He let it be the fuel for his future. Isolation can intensify pain that community can heal. So please know that community is where healing happens. Thirdly, speak to someone. Speak to a friend or family member. Speak to a doctor or phone the Samaritans. Please, please don't go on holding it all alone. There is so much truth in the saying, problem shared is a problem halved. Just the other week, a girl from church messaged to say she was struggling and asked if we could chat. I phoned her and we spoke on the phone for about an hour. She shared all that she was feeling, all that she was thinking. We talked it all through and we spent some time praying. At the end of the conversation, she said how helpful it was and how much better she felt for having shared. And even this week, as I spoke to her, she said that she still felt so grateful for that moment just to talk. Please talk to someone. Don't feel like you're going to be a burden. Please don't feel like you're going to scare them or you're going to destroy them with your feelings. By sharing, you can experience healing. I was officially signed off work for the best part of 2 months back in 2019, and I learnt so much about myself in that season. I took medication every day, I saw a counsellor, I spoke to my friends and my family who I knew had experienced similar things. I took time to rest, to sleep, to recover, to put new rhythms into my life. And like I've already shared, I still have days when it's bad, but I now have tools to help me. You see, the most recent incident that I told you about with my 50 emails, I spent 2 hours completely panicked, with anxiety taking control of my day. I then spoke to Johnny, how I was feeling, what I was thinking, and he encouraged me to take the day off. So we did. I took the day off. We went for a walk, got out into the fresh air, got away from my laptop that was causing the anxiety. I had a really good meal, and then I had a really good night's sleep. And then when I got back to work, I felt so much more able to tackle the problem. Yes, it was still my fault that it happened, but it wasn't a disaster and it was easily fixable and it caused no problems. But my faulty thinking in that moment meant that I didn't feel that. But taking a moment, stepping back really helped. What can you do today to help you? Maybe you need to book a doctor's appointment or start taking medication. Book some therapy, maybe speak to a friend or a family member. Maybe you need to get signed off work. Maybe you need to put new rhythms into your life. But like I mentioned, we need the physical, but we also need the supernatural. We also need God and His supernatural power, His healing, His grace, His love, His peace. So I want to spend a moment right now. You know, God still speaks to us in a whisper, no matter what it is you're experiencing. And so we're going to spend 1 minute right now, and I just want you to close your eyes and listen to the whisper of God. Listen to that still small whisper. He is close enough to listen to you. And finally, I really want to encourage you to get prayer. At Liberty Church London, we believe in the power of prayer, and we have a prayer team ready to pray for you and stand with you in whatever it is you're experiencing. So can I encourage you to click on the link below that says Ask for Prayer and submit a prayer request form. That way our team can find out about you, they can even reach out to you and pray with you this week. Please don't leave the online service this morning without requesting prayer if you need it. But let me pray for us all before we close. Father God, you know exactly what each one of us are dealing with. I pray that you would give us the courage to speak up. I pray you would give us the courage to reach out to friends and family when we need it, God. I pray that you would encourage us to share our experiences, to do the bold things, maybe the seeing the doctor, the getting the medication. Whatever it is, God, I pray you would be with us, that we would hear your whisper, that we would experience your healing and your wholeness. In Jesus' name I pray.